Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. This is the last episode of a 3-episode series that examines singles in the marketplace. I invite back Shane Mauss to talk about the best innovations for singles. I won't give them away here, but you'll see a theme emerge where the innovations we discuss are related to freedom, mobility, and escape from the family unit. However, as we talk, what becomes evident is that these innovations also help singles pursue a diverse set of experiences, to flourish by taking advantage of the time, resources, and freedom that accompany single life. There's one set of obvious innovations, but we leave them to the bonus material, where we have a serious conversation about sex-related inventions. Note, the bonus material is now only available to the solo community. You can apply to be part of that solo community at petermcgraw.org on the solo page. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's return guest is Shane Mauss. Shane is a professional comedian who specializes in comedy about science. He hosts the science podcast, Here We Are, and you can find him in the documentary film, Psychonautics. You may remember him from the Solo Trip episode on psychedelics or the Sex and Evolution episodes. Shane is also a special contributor to my new book, Shtick to Business, which is enough to qualify him to join us today. Welcome back, Shane.
Hey!
So this is the third installment of a series on singles in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the first one, I spoke to a sociologist and demographer about the rise of singles. So here's just a quick overview of this. 128 million singles in the United States. That's 51% of the adult population. 28% of households in the United States have one person. And that percentage is upwards of 50% in some European cities like Stockholm, for example. And one of the things that's really striking, not about the growth of singles, but the growth of solos, that is people living alone, is that it's been exponential.
Wow.
That is, it looks like a hockey stick.
Yeah.
And there's a variety of reasons in that episode that has happened. And I think we're going to talk about some of the underlying reasons here today. The second episode is a conversation with an entrepreneur, Julie Nervelli, and we talk about opportunities to sell to singles. And this episode, which is focused on the best innovations for singles, is coming out on November 11th. Do you know what day that is, Shane?
No, I have no idea. I mean, did you, when you asked me that, did you think that I would know?
No, I didn't think you would know. It is Singles Day.
Oh, really?
Which is the biggest shopping event in the world. And it happens every November 11th. And it was started in the 1990s as an unofficial celebration of being single by Chinese university students. And the date was selected 11/11 because, fittingly, it's full of ones, thus symbolizing being solo.
Yeah.
And so the marketplace is sort of slowly, and especially in Asia, recognizing that singles are a viable market rather than the family unit, as you might imagine. And we're here today to talk about some of the innovations that help us, the solo, rise to the levels that we are at now. And so you and I have both made a list about some of our ideas. Some of them are inventions, but I like using this term innovation because not all of them are sort of tangible products, right? So I wanted a broader perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing is to say is that it's never been better to be single in world history.
It would be impossible to have a better time. I mean, most of human history was like groups of a tribe. Have you heard of the Dunbar number, of course, I imagine?
Oh, is that over 110 or 150?
If I had to guess, I would say it's about 170 is what it's just an estimation of like the number of people that you can know really well in your given environment. And that's based, your brain shaped off over many, 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 many generations would have needed to maybe know 170. Maybe. I mean, that's like, that was, I'm sure, more capacity than anyone was ever going to need, and now all of the sudden,
you have dated 170 people.
I mean, imagine, people have like 170 Facebook friends or something like that, and they feel like a failure or something, for not having more connections or whatever.
Yes, this idea of this kind of Dunbar number, is an interesting one because it suggested how limited we were in terms of who we engaged with, right? So close family, a community, a small village kind of thing. And at that point, it starts to break away where it's just not possible to know everyone.
Right.
And then now we've had this sort of interesting thing where it is possible because we have an ability to track people digitally.
Yeah.
Growing up, I had phone numbers memorized.
Right.
I had a certain number of phone numbers memorized. Then I had a certain number of phone numbers in a little black book.
Right.
And if someone changes their phone number, you lost touch with them. They're gone.
right.
They're just gone.
Yeah.
And so now we have, as you said, Facebook and Instagram and email and all these things where you have, not only do you have a digital record of people dating all the way back to your childhood, where you can reach back to those people, but you also have the ability to contact people in multiple ways.
Yeah.
So you and I communicate via phone, email, text, and then see each other in person. So you and I have four different
Twitter.
On Twitter, live.
I hope that you've muted me by now on Twitter. Well, you know what? That's another amazing thing is you can subscribe to a version of someone that you want. You can subscribe to an Instagram version of Pete or a Twitter version of Pete or a Facebook or all of them or none of them at all. That's so amazing. And what do we even do with all of that? And speaking of the other interesting thing about the Dunbar number is the downside, a potential downside is like, say you truly have the mental capacity to get to know well, and not only that, but maybe a yearning to know well around that number of people. And now you have like these ideas of status hijacked by modern media and movies and everything else. And now like George Clooney's in your Dunbar number, you have a cousin that just got bumped out who you could actually talk to and hang out with because that space need to be made. We needed room for George Clooney in here. And how many things in that Dunbar number are actors or even fictional characters, Well,
yeah, I mean, I have to say that underlying research is beyond my expertise, but I think that,
that won't stop me from talking about anything.
I know that's why you're on here. But I think there is something to be taken away from this. Essentially, though, is the lesson is not that there's some optimal number of people that we can track because we have these other technological reasons and ways to track them. And that number may go up depending on our development. In college, that number may go up. When we know that when people get married and have children, that number goes way, way down. Right. So it expands.
Yes.
It expands and contracts. But one of the things that I think is really underlying this, and I think this is a perfect leaping off point to these best innovations, the things that help give rise to single living, is that we were so reliant on the community.
Yes.
For so long as human beings.
Yeah.
And those communities tended to be 100x or lower in number.
Yeah.
And please.
Oh, I mean, I was also going to say one thing I've been thinking about lately is, you talk with any scientist talking about this stuff in this way, I'm more into like evolutionary biology and psychology than the average person. But I often hear anyone with that background, saying like humans are built to be social animals. They're built to be around people. Blah blah blah. This is what our past was life. Our past was like. But I don't know that that's necessarily that our brain was constructed that way, or that the environment that our brain was in, it was a necessity within the environment. It's like so depending on how territorial a primate is kind of dependent on whether they eat vegetation or whether there's fruit in their diet. Because if it's vegetation, there's no vegetation worth fighting over. But if there's fruit in an environment, there's fruit trees that you want to have a territory, and there's like this limited resource. So that's just, a constraint in an environment that can shape things in all these ways. And I think what's interesting about our modern environment is we might actually be expressing, it might be that people wanted a lot more alone time than they could ever get in our past environment. But how in the world could you do that if you're in a tribe?
Shane, I'm so glad that you said that. And I think the issue is that it can't be the case that a hunter-gatherer's model of a small number that's intensely communal is going to be right for everyone.
No way.
Right? And so what happened was there were some people who just got along swimmingly and just loved that. And then there was the person who sort of was always kind of in the back of the pack. Kind of like, what are they doing back there? And they were just trying to get some peace and quiet. And so what has happened is, because I'm gonna kick this off if that's okay.
Sure.
With one of my favorites, and the reason this is one of my favorites, and it's the C word. It's one of my favorites is because this is a word that gets a lot of bad press nowadays, and that is capitalism. Mm-hmm. And so, and capitalism really is just an extension of cooperation. Another C word.
Indeed.
Yes.
And potentially decentralized power and choice over assets. Certainly, despite whatever your take is on capitalism now, certainly you would have to look back at the history of having royalty distribute wealth to you at their will, and having a capitalistic system is something that absolutely shocked our modern world.
Yeah, and to me, the idea of the invention of money, for example, or even, actually, we should say the invention of barter first, right? Trade first, now allowed so let's step back for a second. The idea essentially is that we think about humans being different than animals because of intelligence or because of language ability. Those actually aren't the things that I think are differentiating. There's a lot of animals that are quite intelligent. Obviously, other animals can communicate. But the ability to cooperate with a stranger, to be able to construct rules, norms, cultural norms that allow two people who have never, ever met before, have no blood lineage, are not a part of the same clan, to meet, get along, and do business is revolutionary.
Yeah.
Because it has speeded this idea of like specialization and creation and exchange.
Yeah.
That now you can start to then branch out, and it really forms the foundation of being able to live on your own. Because now if you have the ability to create some form of wealth, some money, then you can then use that money with strangers.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I think there's a lot of room for improvement.
Sure. And now the other thing, so that we skipped over a step though, going right from hunter-gatherer to now, there was an in-between period that really sucked.
Yeah.
Especially if you had a solo orientation.
Yeah.
And that is agriculture and farming.
Yeah.
Like, talk about a time that's a tough time to be human.
That's when the kid pyramid scheme started. I need more kids on this farm I can put out more stuff. Now there's more mouths to feed. Now we're going to need a bigger farm and more kids to, and on and on.
Yeah. So that was an especially bad time. It was bad for everyone. I mean, like, I think women bore the brunt of it, because, they were, as you said, sort of turned into baby machines. And their work was excruciating in terms of caring for households and so on. But it wasn't a great time to be a man either.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You know, the work was backbreaking. And for and of course, it was a terrible time to be a child because you were put to work pretty damn early. Mm-hmm. And that work was farm work. You know what I mean? So it wasn't the kind of work that you really want young children doing because they're not expanding their full capacities.
Right.
In that time, you know, and then of course it was incredibly risky times, right? Because you're putting all of your eggs in this basket. And then of course you had to just worry about not only the uncertainty of Mother Nature, but then you had to deal with the uncertainty of those feudal lords and robber bandits. And, you know,
I mean, it's insane.
You know,
I mean, everything that's happening, right? Like people with COVID are like, oh, well, these things just happen. These are just natural. It's like, well, no, you packed a bunch of people in, you know, in a very unnatural way. And then you fed those people packed in food of other things that you've packed into, like we've created an interesting environment for diseases that simply couldn't spread in this way and in any other conditions.
Yeah, and these were times where, yeah, that's right. So certainly a lack of food diversity, a lack of diversity in the work that was being done, a lack of diversity in the investments that are being made, mm-hmm. and so on. And so life became very singular. And then, of course, if you were a loner, if you had a solo mentality, it was very hard to make your way because you couldn't really have a farm and you just staff it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And so the rise of capitalism and cooperation eventually gave way to industrialization and to urbanization. And both of those things are very good for singles. Yeah. Yeah. You know, they're very good for singles.
Yeah, it was a rough patch. Fortunately, we got it all figured out and now we're fine.
So you actually have worked in a factory.
Yes, I have. My dad has his own countertop business. I used to go with him as a kid doing kitchen installs, and then he got into making countertops, and I did that for a few years, and we didn't get along very well, but I did it. And then I worked at a grocery store for a few years as a teenager, and then I did 3 months in a crouton factory, 3 years in a furniture factory, 9 months in a metal shop, and then a bunch of odds and ends like construction things and weird stuff like that.
Yes. And so these are all jobs, with the exception of the one working with your father, that you were essentially doing on your own.
Yep.
You could be living anywhere to do that work.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting it's the kind of job that you clearly weren't thriving in that work because you're too intellectually curious, I think.
And I have a terrible attention span.
Yes. Okay. But however, if you needed to survive, you know, this allows you to escape the farm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know. It's amazing. And then to like travel around the world to tell jokes to people is it's so strange. All of this is so strange.
Well, yeah, but again, these are built on these, and they're called revolutions.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the industrial change. It's the industrial revolution. It fundamentally changed the way that we live. And to be clear, there's actually multiple forms of industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Right? So we are in this sort of digital communication version. We're on the cusp of what people are calling the AI revolution and so on. But along with this industrialization was also urbanization. Mm-hmm. So people moving to cities and moving to new environments to which they live. And so I'm going to just put forth a very specific invention that I think is especially one of the best inventions for single people. And that is the apartment building.
Ooh. It's such a great way of cooperating while being separate from everybody.
Yes. Yes,
and you can literally share a wall with someone you'll never meet.
Indeed. Yes. Now, I mean, so I know some people hate the idea of living in an apartment. They've had bad experiences with landlords and roommates and neighbors and so on. And yet 50% of the world's population lives in cities.
Yeah.
And the majority of the people living in cities live in apartment buildings.
You know, never in my entire life have I even considered seriously wanting a house. Sure, in like a one day maybe kind of a way. But I never ever until now had even considered. And I have to say, I've always lived in apartments. That's of the things in my life that I would have changed. I think I always liked my apartment living.
And as a solo, I understand why, right? So one of the nice things about apartments is that it's low cost, right? Yeah. So you don't pay, you're not paying for any extra space that you're not using, which homes have a lot of that, right? People have entire rooms that they use 3 times a year, that they're paying for. They're, and of course, and also, they're paying interest on these things because they're usually borrowing money in order to do that. And then apartment buildings also have communal facilities, so they share resources. So there's a gym that multiple people share. There might be a concierge that multiple people, like you couldn't afford a gym on your own. You couldn't afford the concierge on your own. I mean, you can't afford the pool on your own.
Yeah. And I mean, just the simplest things to even just cheaper house. The idea that I'm able to go and spend 2 or 3 months on the road, which I have many times in my life, just been like, yep, and I don't need to worry about like a pipe bursting or whatever is,
Yeah. So the apartment, and also the other thing about an apartment building is safety. So, so we were talking earlier about how hard these earlier times could be, especially for women. One of the things that an apartment building can provide is safety.
Yeah.
There's security. There's someone at the door. There's key fobs to get up to floors. There's someone to hear you if you scream. You know what I mean? These kinds of things that are there. And so now you can have
that's those billboards that are like, if you lived here, you'd be home by now.
Yes.
They should instead change their slogan to someone to hear you if you scream.
I'm being very serious though, where you can now.
You're absolutely right, but
you can enjoy the grittiness and the excitement of a city that might have some safety issues, but you have a refuge,
right,
in which you can go to.
Yeah.
And as I said, also, and you have to appreciate this, is that they're economical.
Yeah.
You basically get more for $1 when you live in an apartment than when you live in a house that's there. And you also, what it does is, for those listeners who've never owned a home, especially as a solo, I caution you about doing that.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear you say this, Pete.
Oh, I seriously caution you. So the first reason is that singles are more mobile than families. Yep. And one of the nice things about apartments, I just moved, by the way, 2 days ago. And I moved in one day. Like, people amazing. Showed up at 8 a.m. and then I had maybe 5 boxes still to unpack at the end of the day, but my life was almost normal again by the end of the day. And it wasn't as expensive as you might think to get that kind of help.
Yeah.
But the idea essentially is that apartments allow mobility and houses don't, because houses often have such transactional costs. So this came up in the first Financial Freedom episode with Money Amy, where she has a little asterisk about home ownership, which is, if you think you'll be moving within the next 5 years, do not buy a home, because you need to be in it for 5 years.
I would also say that before you buy a house, I've never been a homeowner, but what I would have to ask myself is, okay, I want to live in a house. Do I also want the house to be both my hobby and my work? Do I want to, when I'm like, what do I want to do? What do I want to do to like wind down or whatever, take a break? What do I do for fun with my money? Do I want to put that into remodeling and doing things like that and all the maintenance? You know,
or do it yourself?
Yeah, or go and take a vacation and live in an Airbnb for a month.
Yeah. So the idea is this, and I've done both now, and look, I can understand the listener who's pushing back on this right now because I understand of wanting to be.
First off, I don't like your listeners that don't agree with everything that I have to say. let me just put that out there. Any listeners out there that have a subtle disagreement with anything, sorry.
Then so certainly don't follow Shane on Twitter then. So the so the idea essentially is, you're going to pay. Look, if you want it, I understand why you might have lifestyle reasons for it. You might want the space. There's a lot of reasons to want it besides the fulfilling the American dream. But your point is well taken, is you're going to pay for it. Yeah. So you're either going to pay for it with extra money or you're going to pay for it with your time. That is, if you have a lawn, it needs to get cleaned up and cut in some way. If you have gutters, they need to get emptied in some way. So you're either going to pay for it with your sweat equity or you're going to pay for it with your equity. Mm-hmm. And so that's true. So I think that's enough about apartment buildings. But I like the idea of the sort of communalness that go into it in terms of sharing costs and lowering costs because of the fixed costs. But I also like the independence. And I do like your point, which is you turn out the lights, you close the door, and you could be gone. And you lower the heat, you close the shades, you put enough water in your, in your plants, and you can be gone for quite a long time. Yeah. And you're on your own and you're mobile.
Yeah.
I have one thing to add, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. There's an extension of apartment buildings, and these are nursing homes and assisted living.
Yeah.
And the invention of those things also allow freedom for singles.
And might I also stress one more time, just like with capitalism, we are in no way implying there is not a whole lot of work to be done when it comes
to improve these things. Absolutely. These things. Well, so as I said, like the people who have bad experiences with apartment buildings, a lot of those problems can be solved. Like, so if you've ever lived in an apartment building that has thick walls, that takes care of a lot of problems. But if you live in a cheap one that has thin walls, now you know what I mean? So there are technological advances that can fix and improve some of these things. Some of them are going to be regulatory, obviously, with things like nursing homes and assisted living. And this is the sad thing about life, as is often the case. Money solves a lot of problems, right? So more expensive assisted living and nursing homes and apartments are better than less expensive ones, and so, but you are right. Yeah, but this is, what we need to contrast this with is suburban living in the 60s.
Yeah.
Which people like to make out to be this wonderful time in American history. And all I do is invite you to watch Mad Men.
Yeah.
And watch both the women and the men struggle during that time with, yes, it's prosperous, but it's not clearly one in which people were flourishing.
Yeah. And I mean, gosh, am I going to talk about the patriarchy? I'm sorry. This is so annoying. I'll say it. Yeah, I've been taking a evolutionary anthropology course just pretty recently, and we were talking about these groups that are studied today, these hunter-gatherer groups, and it seems like in the majority of cases, like males and females are exactly equal in the way that one of them can't tell the other one what to do. The other, like everyone gets to advocate for themselves, but no one gets to be like, well, I'm right because of my gender or whatever. I believe that's something that happened, that came along with agriculture, that we're still kind of cleaning up the mess on.
Indeed, yes. Right.
And And as a guy, it's like we might have figured out how to quick switch and get the upper hand there for a little while. Once it allowed for bigger winners and also more losers in guys too. Once you could accumulate all of this wealth. But I saw some graph that was something like 35% of hunter-gatherer tribes today are polygamous. Sometimes something like 45% of them are polygamous. Most of the time, like it's a common thing to happen in these tribes. Not that everyone's doing it or whatever, but just like it's a very acceptable thing that like a guy might have multiple wives or whatever, and everyone like fools around a little bit more. And something like 5% of them have some polyandry that's somewhat normal. Usually it's lack of resources, and a woman will marry often two brothers.
I see.
But so all of that is to say is that to infer that what humans are existing in right now is normal is, I mean, it's just normal to what we've experienced in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think that the strongest case to be made, and this goes all the way back to what I opened with, which is humans' ability to cooperate because they can make up their own rules.
Right.
And what happens is those rules get adjusted based upon the environment and based upon the context. Mm-hmm. So that is, there is no natural law. That is, there is no one way to do it. We know that humans will change their behavior, will change the rules as things change. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that monogamy may rise in status or fall in status as a result of context is not at all surprising.
This is the issue of the science of animals in captivity, you know, and understanding just how much can we actually infer from,
watching an animal in a cage.
How much does inductive reasoning work when it's this completely opposite novel environment?
Indeed. Yes, that's great. So tell me what you have.
Sure. Are we going to put aside of the elephants in the room and focus on the more subtle, like creative ideas at the moment? Or
Yeah. So for the listener, we are going to, so there's some obvious ones that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So, right. And so we're going to do some bonus material about all the sex stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to brush over some of that too and give people a preview. I mean, I think we could sum a lot of it up in like a minute, really, but
yeah, no, let's save all the sex stuff for the bonus material. There is one thing that's related to sex though that we have to address now. Mm-hmm. What do you think that is?
Birth control.
Absolutely.
Birth control is the single, I mean, to me, I think it's the single greatest invention in humanity. Again, speaking of things that I hope we improve upon, I wish there was a male birth control that would, not a vasectomy, a temporary, you could go off of it and be fertile again when you so choose to procreate. I think that would be amazing. I think, without doing a single bit of research, I believe that there was some development of that, and there was like some mild side effects, like nothing compared to what a lot of females have to deal with that like men were just like, nope, we're not doing it, which I hope that maybe things are changing, especially with more females in science. I would absolutely take a male birth control as someone who has, for whatever reason, not gotten a vasectomy and should. I would absolutely take a male birth control tomorrow if I had one.
Yeah, indeed, I agree with you. So so talk me through your logic though about why this makes your list and why it's on the top.
This
of your
is
list.
Kind of going back to, our fruit trees, social life. Are we actually built to be this social, or was it a part of the environment? And birth control is one of those things where it didn't really matter if you didn't want kids in an ancestral environment. what were you going to do? Never have sex in your life? Like, it would have been so rare for someone to, but kids are incredibly costly, and it makes sense to me that we would have psychological framework that would make us, much in the way sex feels good so that we'll reproduce. I would think that psychologically we would intuitively understand some costs of offspring. And it's just that those costs would have been enough to maybe make you forego like pursuing a new relationship, or like once you have 4 kids, you're like, okay, enough already. I'm not going to use it anymore, I guess, but all of the sudden you can have sex and not have kids as a result of it. And that changes everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea is this. So first of all is like, certainly imagine as a woman being in an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah.
And so I would add, so closely related to birth control would be divorce, would be the opportunity to divorce.
Yeah.
That is that, so really what we're talking about here is that birth control is in the same way that money can be a path to independence, birth control is a path to independence.
And by the way, hunter-gatherer tribes, a lot of them have both marriage and divorce. Very common.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Yeah. So the idea essentially is that once you got pregnant, the forces were such, and the challenge of raising a child is such that then you are tethered to this other person. And if this other person wasn't a good person to be tethered to.
Or they've just changed and they were once the perfect person to be tethered to and aren't anymore.
Now they're an alcoholic. Now they're, you know what I mean? Whatever the problem is that has
life is
has
a chaotic state of events.
Indeed, yeah. I love the fact that someone bets that like this person at age 30 is going to be so wonderful at age 70. I mean, that's just
you'll have just as good a luck finding someone you hate and seeing if that maybe 30 years later you'll be like, you know what, there are a few things I like about this person.
Yeah, well, I mean, the work on arranged marriages suggests
that's true. Yeah, it's like a real like Abraham Lincoln style dating. Like I mate with people that I don't get along with as well.
Well, I think Abe Lincoln just didn't like the idea of being married in general.
I mean, he would pick people. He would pick political adversaries as his advisors.
Oh, I see what you mean. I got it. I understand your across the aisle stuff. So I agree with you. I think birth control, obviously it has improved as a technology for women. There are multiple forms of birth control, and it can be better regulated and so on, in the sense that it has the side effects are down, but they're still very real. They're just less of a side effect than a baby is, which is a huge side effect of having sex. It's
amazing. And especially if think of what could be done in the future if they actually now that people are like paying attention to the many side effects and many problems of birth control, which in a worse Mad Men-ish era where women's feelings or hormones or whatever were at best a second thought, what could be created in the future to help with hormonal changes rather than worsen them, and who knows? It's incredible.
I do too. I know, and I understand. So we agree on that one. I think it's huge. Again, it's about the freedom, and it's about choice, and it's about mobility. I mean, that really is, I think, for a lot of people, the autonomy is often what drives single living, that they just don't want to have to merge with others. And I actually don't think it's a lack of sociability. The research actually bears this out. The singles are more connected.
Yeah. I saw someone make this tweet recently that I really liked that was, I don't remember what they said, but it was something about how underappreciated friend love is in our modern society. And my gosh, speaking to you or any of my friends, or like I said, like all of these female friends that I'm talking with all of the time during, like, if I had a girlfriend right now, I bet she would probably take issue with the friendships that I've formed with a bunch of female, and they're like, but they're, platonic, interesting, and that's something that, man, it makes me not even want to be in a relationship again, because it's so much better than being in like some, I don't know. But
yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It's a lot, again, as came up previously, is that married people have the one, single people have the ones. And so you can, I don't call you for all of my problems.
Yeah.
I call you for certain problems.
Right.
I call you for certain things and so on. So this is actually a perfect segue into my next item on my list. And that is the mobile phone.
I mean, you have some great picks, Pete. Honestly. I mean, it's just everything. Think about, it's hard for me to detach I actually called a couple people in relation to this that were like one of my female friends who is like not single, but was living apart from their significant other for a period of time. And I wanted to ask her what, like, her favorite, just things that make living alone, nothing to do with, because dating apps and stuff like that are going to come up, but actually just like surviving alone. And yeah, if you think about what life would be like as, say, a road comic back in the day, they used to have to find a payphone to get directions, to get it's amazing to be out there, to be the lone wolf out on this is why they were like these cult heroes. Like, who is this person that travels around telling jokes, and then every time they show up they're like saying these naughty words and stuff like that.
Well, I think about this is that prior to the mobile phone, you needed a home base.
Yeah.
Right? So you needed a place that had, the big invention, when you had the home base was the answering machine. Right? So the idea essentially is there were times I would call Shane at his house, and it would just ring. Mm-hmm. And it would just ring, and I guess I got to call him back later, and I would call him back later, and so on. Then at some point, I get to call Shane. I get to leave him a message, and then he would call me back, and then he would leave me a message, and then but in order to get the message, I had to go back to my dorm room. I had to go back to my apartment. I had to go back to my house. Maybe at some point you were able to call in and get your messages. It never worked as well as promised, and so on. But my point about the mobile phone is initially is that now I can get a hold of almost anyone, anywhere, as I need to, and also be able to if I really need to get them on the phone, I can do that.
I mean, today I was, this was also just like online, but I was also typing a lot of it on my phone. I was, me and a girl were flirting, some stranger on Instagram or whatever. There was this other girl that's like a platonic thing I was talking with. And then I called my assistant we had a chat about a few issues coming up. And this is all in like the span of like 30 minutes, almost an hour or whatever. I'm pretty much doing all of this at the same time, having a conversation with 3 different people, having 3 different social experiences at the same time. A flirtation, dating thing, a interesting conversation with a different unrelated stranger, and then business with my coworker, all at the same time.
I agree. I mean, we can continue this, the obvious extensions of this to, the ease in ordering food and connecting and so on. But I actually just recently launched an episode on digital nomadship. Yeah. So you were talking about the lone wolf, these road comics. There are now people who don't own a home.
That was me.
They don't even own an apartment. Yeah, you did this for
I loved
a long
it.
time
I did it for one. I mean, I was basically doing it for 14 years, pretty much. But I did it for 1 year officially. All my stuff in storage, lived on the road. I loved it. I was enjoying when I first started doing it, I thought maybe I'll try this for 3 years and assess from there. And I can always pull the ripcord at any time. Like if I'm a month in and I'm like, what the hell have I done? I can pull the ripcord. It can be done in like 6 months, and it was the time of my life. Really. It was amazing.
Indeed. Yeah. Okay. So that was mine. I just think this idea, again, there's this sort of underlying element to what are the greatest inventions for singles, what are the greatest innovations for singles. These are things that allow you to live on your own, to pursue autonomy, to not be tethered to a place, to lower your costs, and to give you the kind of freedom to operate as you want to operate. And what I think is interesting is some of these things actually increase your sociability. So living in an apartment building increases your sociability because you see people at the pool, you see people in the lobby. There's the chance for chance connections, and you get to know your neighbors and they become friends and and so on. And so there's this interesting push-pull that's happening that at the same time that you're able to live on your own, it actually allows you to connect to people better. Right? And so moving into an assisted living facility and out of a home can actually help an elderly person thrive. Because now they're interacting with folks, they're having meals with other people, but yet they still have the sanctity of their own space. Right. And the pride of their own
right.
space. Okay, what do you have next on your list?
Well, let's go back a little ways. I like these like deep time examples, but also the most modern one that I can think of is just everything food preservation related, from like a modern refrigeration to like canning and things like that. Like everything, all of the advancements in food preservation that have happened since the Industrial Revolution. And I mean, I'm sure hunter-gatherers were like trying things and stuff like that, but the idea that you can have even something like one of those wine pumps, where like you can be living by yourself and feel like a glass of wine, but without having to drink the whole bottle because otherwise it's going to waste. And if I open it, I better drink the whole bottle. That it's like that with every, like, it doesn't make that much sense for me in normal conditions to go to the grocery store and buy all of these different ingredients and stuff, because I'm always on the move. So I can, one, have a bunch of things that store for a long time, and two, order food anytime that I want to. I have no more food dependence on the tribe.
Yeah, I mean, this idea, I like the wine pump. So for people who don't know what he's talking about, essentially is you can open a bottle of wine, you can pour yourself a glass, and then you basically pump out the air, which is what'll spoil it, and then preserve it for a day later in the week. Yeah,
it lasts for like another 2 days.
Okay, another 2 days. So the thing about this is, first of all, a bottle of wine is not built for a solo. A bottle of wine is built for two people. Right? It's essentially like 2.5 glasses of wine, which is really, that's about the limit that you should be having with another person anyways, right? Because, too much alcohol is going to impair your performance anyways, gentlemen. But I do, this idea, and I think this is, you're identifying an extension of a more general trend that we can again connect back to capitalism and industrialization, which is, for example, the invention of the washing machine and the dryer, right? Like anything that strips away labor and errands and preparation now allows you to break free of a familial structure in which one person is caring for a home and another person is caring about income. And now allows you to do both, which is to create income and care for a home or an apartment, as I was saying, and to do so at lower costs, greater safety, less time, and to be able to then use your leisure time to flourish.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's just not wasteful in the case that you're saying, which is I have this happen sometimes where I buy something with the thought I'm going to prepare it, and there's an expiration date on it. And there's I open the fridge and I see that thing and it just tortures me. I'm like, I don't want to waste it. I just don't want to waste it.
The ability to be able to get any food you want anytime you want it is so crazy. To have to rely on, to have to like be nice to the one guy in the tribe because he's the one that knows how to like find whatever insect that is like a good spice for this and that.
That's a good, it is interesting. I do agree with you. Again, I mean, I think some people hear this and say, well, this helps non-solos too.
I think a lot of these things, that's why I was trying to think of like things that help a solo person more than, but I think that that's not the case with a lot of these things. I think a lot of the examples that we have, these are things that a solo person probably would not be able to exist without these things, whereas coupled up people would have existed in either environment, with or without them.
I agree. That's well said. I completely agree. I'm actually really totally pumped up right now, because I do think that like technology often gets a bad rap and of course it's imperfect and it sometimes causes problems or side effects and so on. But again, if it allows people to break free of the existing structure, and the other thing about it is, we were talking about communication and about that being an aspect of the Industrial Revolution. This podcast exists, right? The fact that like-minded single people are able to get information. Yeah. I've launched a Slack channel. It's invite only right now, but you can go to petermcgraw.org to the solo page and apply. You can now communicate with members of the community around the ideas. And what I would like people to do is to come to that forum with their ideas, right? What are the things that make a difference in your own life?
Can I say another thing that's been on my mind that I didn't think of ahead of time, but just in this conversation, it keeps on popping up in my head, is the idea to have clubs. I'm sure there was always cliques and in little tribes, in little friend groups and everything else. Mm-hmm. But to be like, I don't like anything anyone does in my tribe. I'm going to go and find a completely different whether that be the sports team or your church or your motorcycle club or your chess club or whatever. The ability to curate a social group in such a way with things like Meetup or whatever else is incredible. And you could say the same thing about couples could do all the same thing. It's just that this is things that also another part of this conversation is that some of these things solos can do them more. Solos have the freedom and the ability to use them more. And so the idea that, Pete, you and I would say that I'm insecure about my level of success if measured by my social network. And if I were to go back in time and say, when I just think a thing, like thousands of people are interested in reading about a thought that I had. while I was drunk. And blowing off a little bit of steam. Like we can solo, but with a cult. It's like something in our modern environment.
So I'm actually like a little bit emotional right now because the way I have been thinking about this as I approached this podcast was, what are the innovations that allow us to escape the sort of conventional structure, to escape the relationship escalator and the familial structure, and that allows us
take the good things that we like about the regular structure and minimize as many of the negative things.
That's right. But what has happened in this conversation, and that you just said so eloquently, is that solo is built on a premise, several premises. One of the premises is that being single allows opportunity, that the time, the energy, and the money that might normally go to a marriage with children can be used to for other things.
I wish your target demographic was like, you should start doing a children's version of this for like grade schoolers to listen to. Honestly, this should be after this pandemic. You should go around and give talks in like whatever elementary school, middle school, high school kids, whatever. This should be in part of a health class. It should be mandatory that there's like at least one class that's dedicated to this other option.
Yes. That'll never happen, or not never happen.
I'm not saying you doing it. I'm joking around about that, but I'm somewhat serious in a health class actually like expressing this as an idea of a way that people not only can live but might enjoy more than other alternatives. That isn't for everybody. And no one's saying like, come on, the more singles over here, the better, or whatever.
No, it's just an alternative. So this idea is that a lot of the things that we are doing, it's not just to escape it, but also it allows to, I often use
I just think about all of the people that have been through divorces already that are hearing this podcast and are like, God damn it. Where was this insight 20 years ago?
Yeah, the licensing of it all. But I do like this idea that you can, it provides opportunity for growth, opportunity to live your best life. As you were saying earlier, if you were part of a hunter-gatherer tribe, in some ways we were built for that. But if you were a dreamer, if you were an inventor, if you were an artist, if you were a poet, if you had interests and hobbies that were not accepted by the group, you didn't live your best life. And the things that we're talking about allow people to customize their existence in a way that is extraordinary.
And if I could advocate for my as I kind of forward the idea that looking at life through a deep time evolutionary lens is not only an easy tool to use, but an underutilized one and underknown and represented one. And the reason why it's important is also for the things that you need to be wary of as a solo person. Like, does it mean if you go your life now not having any children, are there psychological mechanisms built into your where there might be some alarms going off once in a while and you feel dissatisfied? How it expresses itself is just this general feeling of dissatisfaction that you can't quite put your finger on. And sometimes it might just be like, imagine you could just talk to all those different like firings and stuff out there and all the different structures and be like, oh, new situation out there. We don't need kids or whatever.
We don't need to panic.
In the same way that knowing about something like the negativity bias is a useful tool in deciding how much of my negativity bias has utility right now, and I should be fearful of a given threat, and how much of it is over-perceiving a threat that's limiting me from going and traveling more or meeting different people or what have you.
All right, let's do a couple more. Then we're going to wrap up, and then we'll
do
talk
the
about sex stuff
X-rated version of the. I have another one, or is it your turn? Let's go way deep time on that note. Speaking of lenses and things, I thought that this would be a fun one. A mirror. I think that the ability to see your own reflection, Pete. I remember you and I.
I'm making a face right now. I'm like, I'm making that Joe Rogan face.
I remember you and I you were visiting me one day when I was living in Malibu. I think we had a beach workout or something. We're walking down the beach. Two friends that haven't seen each other in a while, and you got like kind of serious, and you were like, Shane, there's something that I need to tell you. It happened to me at a certain age when like a friend had to pull me aside and like point something out to me. And this is something friends do to one another. And I'm just like, oh my God, what is this? What am I about to find out about myself? And you were like, it's time that you start trimming your ear hair. And the thing is that we don't appreciate is compared to primates, the ability to so here's there's this I've probably told you this before, or maybe you've heard me joke about it, but it's incredible. I believe it was a rhesus monkey. So in thinking about a theory of mind and thinking about a mammal's ability to understand that something else has a mind, and how do you measure that? And one of the ways is like, well, can it recognize itself in the mirror and know that it's it in the mirror? And you put like,
I see,
you put like you paint like a little red mark on its forehead and give it a mirror. And if it looks, and it's like, oh, it connects that it's them, and it has this thing to be like, why do I have this different thing on my head right now? And so like dolphins can like notice themselves in the mirror. Your dog never will. But because of the small size of its brain, they didn't think that it would be able to recognize itself in the mirror. So, okay, gentlemen, place your bets. They hand a rhesus monkey a mirror. It recognizes itself like immediately, goes for that little red paint thing. And then within 30 seconds, it just starts checking out its undercarriage. Taking a look at those testicles. Oh, I wonder what's going on here. And that might, and it is hilarious, but
where are you going with this?
If you think about like the ability to like game the system, the ability to make yourself like look different and look like more attractive, and what like sexual selection would have done to humans, and like the vanity that would have happened. And normally, Pete, if you and I were living in a tribe, we would be reliant on one another to tell each other about our ear hair or whatever, to tell each other that we have a booger hanging out of our nose. And I imagine that was pretty commonplace, but there was probably some jokes that were had too from time to time. And once you now have think of a mirror as a tool. Once you now have this tool that you can sit and you can stare and you can tweak these things about your hair that used to be this honest indicator, this fitness indicator of like how thick or how thin you could extend this and just say cosmetics generally speaking. And who does it the most? Single people. You know what happens when someone gets a divorce? They join that gym. They set aside, there's no more pajamas. You know, now we're spending a bunch more time in the mirror. We're tweaking all of these different things. And what would have that done to even the shape of like our facial hair, why we're attracted to, say, breasts in the way that we are? Like all of these things could have had some weird feedback within the way in which sexual selection shaped us.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So if I'm understanding this correctly, this is really fascinating. What you're essentially saying is that a mirror allows you to improve your appeal to others without relying on others.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there's data on this about how often people look at themselves in the mirror. And that it's probably a striking amount that people do this. And of course, now we have more than mirrors. Those phones now allow us to take selfies. Right? So we're now able to take a picture of ourselves and snap it and optimize that appeal.
We can see what we would look like when we're 90, maybe. We can see what we'd look like if we lost some weight or added some weight. We can see what we might look like if you and I had a baby together somehow.
Yes, that's right. I have two quick ones. I'm going to make them fast. Do you have another on your list? But I'll do one.
I'm not even sure that I do other that aren't within the, because I did spend some time with the elephant in the rooms.
Yes. Well, I love so we're going to wrap up here in a moment. I love the mirror one. It certainly shows how it takes a comedian to come up with mirror. A behavioral economist is not coming up with mirror. So a behavioral economist will come up with this one. And this one I got from Amy Guerin. So she was a previous guest on the Relationship Escalator episode. And that is the rise of the social safety net. Social Security in the United States.
Oh, that's very good.
But universal health care in other countries and so on, where you don't have to rely on a partner, to have your most basic needs met. And so I think that
not only that, I mean, think of the wild chances that we can take. I mean, there are no trapeze artists without safety nets. If you don't get to first have a safety net, right? You simply cannot train to be a trapeze artist and then eventually take that net out. And do things at that level.
And then my last one is, and this is, some people might see this as frivolous, but I actually think that it's very real and it matters. And that is the domestication of dogs and cats.
Yeah, love it.
And so while dog and cat ownership is higher with families, it's been on the rise with singles. And these numbers are actually pretty striking, that over 50% of singles and families have a domesticated
and look at
pet.
What's going on too in our very, very, very modern era. We're talking last 10 years modern.
Is the pet as child
and the bests of now I can take my pet anywhere. I can take my pet on the plane. I can take because what have we been saying about most of these great single inventions? Look how much you can travel. So it probably was the
mobility.
Case that there would have been a lot more single people earlier. Think about this. One, how many single people would have had pets earlier in the past if they could have traveled with them and taken them around, their little dog or whatever. And then also, how many more people would have been single or traveled more or whatever if they would have known that they could have an animal and do it.
Yeah, I would add to that, which I agree with your thinking on this. What I would add to it is, a challenge of solo living can be loneliness, right? That is that you want some intimacy, you want some love, some companionship. Of course, you want it on your terms, which is part of the reason, you know what I mean? Yeah. You don't always want it, and so on. And one of the beautiful things about dogs and cats especially dogs, cats are more, you get it when they want it. Dogs, you get it when you want it. And that is that they are love machines, that they adore you. There's no conditionals. Yeah. And so they provide a form of intimacy, love. They actually help with sociability, right? So, people walk their dogs and it gets them out of the house. And what do? They talk to other people who have dogs, and so on. People will never approach a stranger on the street and talk to them. But if they have a dog, people will walk up and pet a dog. Yeah. And then consequently will strike up a conversation with this person. And so, and I just see how much people adore their pets.
And think about, again, if I look through this at deep time, if you look at like these, I think they're called, do you know the term? It's like a evolutionarily stable system. I think it's called ESS.
I don't.
It's just there's like this balanced system of a symbiotic relationship in the environment or whatever. But there's probably a lot of utility in the domestication of wolves, in terms of maybe they were keeping other things away at the time. Humans, I don't know enough about the evolution of the bonding and domestication of dogs that came along. But look at
But it was very early. I do know this. It was very, very early on in human history that dogs were domesticated.
And think about like hunting dogs and stuff like that. So they used to have this utility, and now you can have not only a thing that has zero like actual utility like that, but can actually be a detriment. Like you can get a oh man, you can get a pug, like a thing that's like mostly dying and needs your help, like all throughout its entire life. It's going to do nothing but like cost you, but you just get this like lump of like cuddles. That's amazing. This is another thing that's just incredibly new for solo people.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, you think about this, like if you were to strike out on your own back in the day, you would need a dog.
Yeah.
Right? You would need a dog, like, something that smells and hears a predator, something that gets scared with predator.
You got to watch this documentary, Happy People, on Netflix.
Okay. Oh, I've seen
the Russian guy.
I think you've talked to me about this. Yeah.
You haven't watched it though?
I haven't. I've only seen the trailer.
He's a solo. It's as solo as it gets. He goes into town once a year or whatever, and he lives up. It's just like him and his axe and some dogs just making their way out in the wilderness, and it's amazing. But when I talk about utility, like those things are like his lifeline and everything else. And now you can have. But remember my little Don Nichols, who was like this.
Yes.
Freak of nature that like wouldn't make it one day out in the wild, that you can now just have as your like little weird cuddle slave.
Yeah. So for those of you listening with Shane's ex, they both got a dog together called Don Lickles. Don Lickles was like smaller than a gerbil. And it was a dog.
He had a birth defect that made him a third the size that he was already supposed to be, which was already small. And then he was a third. He was the third the size of small.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, I think the takeaway of this is that, while pets might have started out to be very utilitarian, you use them to hunt, for protection and so on, then they may still have some of those elements right there, but now you have the pocketbook dog or cats, and obviously, and they are there for hedonic purposes. They are there because of intimacy and for love and for connection. And one of the things that I think is really striking, and I think we'll end on this note, connecting it back, is to the idea of grooming. Is one of the striking things about grooming is that it releases endorphins. And so petting, picking nits and so on, combing hair, releases endorphins in the person being groomed the animal being groomed and the animal doing the grooming, which explains why a total stranger will walk up to a dog and start petting it, because the dog will allow it to happen. Because both the dog and the person feel good as a result of doing that. Now imagine having your own endorphin machine in your house and available to you, And you never have to worry about divorcing.
So next time I see you with a dog, Pete, I want you to be totally okay with it licking you as much as it wants to, because that's just that dog grooming you back. And you're going to get lots of great endorphins from it.
All right. So we're going to wrap up here. This was really great. For those of you who are part of the solo community on the Slack channel, you're going to have access to the bonus material where we talk about the sex innovations. So that will be, you'll have to apply and join the solo community to get access to that. But in the meantime, Shane, I want to say thank you for your time, your insights.
Thank you. This is awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.